My husband asked for a divorce. I want the house, the cars, everything, he said, his voice cold, like he was reading from a checklist. My lawyer nearly fell out of his chair. You can't just give it all to him. You'll lose everything. I looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, give it all to him. Everyone thought I had lost my mind. Friends, family, even my own heart ached at the thought of walking away with nothing. But they didn't understand. They didn't know that letting him think he was winning was exactly the plan. At the final hearing, I signed every paper, handed over every asset, and he smiled. Oh, how he smiled. Victory danced in his eyes. He didn't know that the moment he thought he had won, the game had already been decided. I remember the first time I met him. He was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, confident, irresistible. The way he smiled made the world around me blur, and the way he spoke, it was as if he was reading directly from the pages of my dreams. I was young, maybe too naive, but I believed in him. I believed in us. Our early years together were like something out of a movie. Dinners and candlelight, weekends traveling to places I'd only ever dreamed of, laughter that seemed endless. He made me feel like the most important person in the world. I trusted him completely, more than anyone ever. More than I trusted myself. But slowly, the cracks began to show. At first, they were tiny, almost imperceptible. A harsh word when he was tired. A slight impatience when I asked a simple question. I brushed it off, told myself everyone had bad days, everyone had flaws. I loved him enough to ignore the little things. I loved him enough to hope that maybe he'd change. And then came the bigger things. Late nights at the office that weren't explained, small lies about money or meetings, disappearing for days without notice. The charming man I had fallen in love with was slowly vanishing, replaced by someone I barely recognized. I started noticing the way he looked at me, not with love, but with something colder, calculating. And the truth hit me one night when I overheard him laughing on the phone with someone, saying things I shouldn't have heard. Words about control, money, how easy it would be to take everything I had if I ever got in the way. I was heartbroken, but anger soon followed. How dare he? How dare he plan to ruin everything we built together after everything we shared? I wanted to scream, to confront him, but a quiet voice in my head told me to wait. To watch. To plan. That's when the seed of revenge was planted. Not the reckless, vengeful kind that bursts in flames, but the slow, careful, lethal kind that destroys quietly and completely. During this time, my friends noticed the change in me. Are you okay? They'd ask, eyes full of concern. He doesn't deserve you, they'd say, their voices trembling with frustration. But I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell them that my heartbreak had already turned into something else. I had to play my part, the grieving, confused wife, the one who might be losing everything. It was a role I mastered with frightening precision. I kept pretending to be vulnerable, to be naive, to be willing to fight for scraps if necessary. But behind closed doors, I was methodical. I hired a lawyer I could trust, someone who understood the subtle art of strategy rather than brute force. We mapped everything out: accounts, assets, properties, hidden legal avenues. Every move he made, I anticipated. Every boast, every arrogant assumption, I logged in my mind like a ledger. I learned to hide my emotions with an almost surgical skill. He believed I was hurting, that I would crumble under the pressure of losing the life we had built. And maybe I was hurting in the way people do when someone they love turns against them, but the hurt became fuel. It sharpened me. It made me precise, patient, untouchable. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, yes, when the memories of our early happiness felt like knives twisting in my chest. I mourned the life I thought I had, the love I believed in. But each tear was accompanied by a thought: he will regret this. He will pay, but in a way that he can't ignore. I also started to notice the little things that made him careless. His arrogance, his ego, his constant need to be the one in control. These traits, which once seemed charming, were now weaknesses I could exploit. I began to quietly move assets, prepare documents, and even plant legal breadcrumbs that would make him think he was winning while all the time I was steps ahead. Sometimes I would watch him from across the room, pretending to be lost in my own sadness. He would smile, thinking he had me figured out. He would brag to friends about how easily he could take everything from me, how lucky he was that I was too weak to fight. And each time, a quiet, almost imperceptible smile would curl at the corner of my lips. Because he had no idea. No idea how meticulously I had planned. No idea that his triumph was already an illusion. Even my family thought I was making a mistake. Don't just give it all to him, they warned. You're stronger than you know. Fight. But I couldn't tell them the truth. I couldn't tell them that surrendering, appearing weak, was all part of the plan. They didn't know that sometimes the smartest way to win is to let the other person think they've already won. And so, I let the story unfold. I let him believe he had the upper hand. I let him fantasize about a victory he didn't even know was an illusion. Every meeting, every negotiation, every casual remark I made was calculated. The heartbreak I had suffered fueled my patience, my cunning, and my resolve. I had learned to turn pain into power, sorrow into strategy, and betrayal into opportunity. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, not just materially but psychologically. I wanted him to understand, fully and completely, that he had underestimated me, that his arrogance, his greed, his lack of foresight would be his undoing. And when the day came, I would not just hand him a loss. I would hand him a lesson so sharp, so complete, that he would never forget it. I never imagined that love could be so deceiving, that the man I had adored, trusted, and loved with all my heart could be capable of such cold, calculated betrayal. But I had learned a truth that many people never understand. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the ones who make us strongest. And in that strength, I had crafted a weapon, invisible but unbreakable, one that would turn his victory into ruin without him even realizing it, until it was too late. And so I waited, patiently, calmly, quietly. Every heartbeat, every thought, every breath was a step toward the day when he would finally learn the cost of underestimating me. The first person I told was my lawyer. He had been with me since the beginning, since the early cracks in my marriage had started to show, since I first sat across from him with trembling hands and a voice that barely held together. He had seen clients cry, scream, beg. But when I told him what my husband wanted, I watched something different cross his face.
Pure disbelief.
He wants everything? He asked, leaning back in his chair, eyebrows drawn together. The house, the cars, the accounts, the investments, everything? Yes, I said calmly. He let out a slow breath and rubbed his temples. Then we fight. I shook my head. That was the moment he truly looked at me. Not as a client, not as a victim, but as someone he didn't understand. No, I said again. We don't fight. We give it to him. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Absolutely not, he said. I won't let you do this. You are entitled to half, more than half, considering the circumstances. He's bluffing. He thinks you're weak. I met his gaze without flinching. Let him. My lawyer stared at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. Do you understand what you're saying? He demanded. You'll walk away with nothing. Years of your life gone. Your security gone. I smiled faintly. I understand perfectly. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, he sat back down, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wild animal. You're planning something, he said. I didn't answer. He leaned forward. If you are, then you need to trust me. And if you're not, if you're just in shock, then you're making the biggest mistake of your life. I trust you, I said. But right now, I need you to trust me too. He searched my face for signs of panic, grief, desperation.
He found none.
Only stillness. That was when he realized this wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Still, he warned me. Over and over. He laid out every possible consequence, every risk. He told me how people lose everything this way, how they regret it later, how the law doesn't reward silence or restraint, it rewards aggression. I listened patiently. And then I left his office and stepped into a storm of voices that all said the same thing.
Fight.
My sister was the first to explode. "You're insane," she said over the phone, her voice sharp with fear. "You're just going to let him take your life away? After what he did to you?" "I'm letting him take what he thinks is mine," I said quietly. "That makes no sense." "It will." She didn't believe me. None of them did. My friends were worse. Some were angry. Some were pitying. Others were almost offended, as if my decision was an insult to every woman who had ever been wronged. "Stand up for yourself. Don't be a martyr. You're stronger than this. You'll regret it." Every word landed like a blow, not because they were wrong, but because I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell them that the fight they wanted was exactly what he expected. I couldn't tell them that he had already underestimated me, and that was my greatest advantage. I couldn't tell them that every tear I didn't shed in public was being saved for something far more precise. So I let them think I was broken. I let them think grief had hollowed me out. I let them think I was numb, confused, afraid of confrontation.
It was easier that way.
My mother cried when I told her. She held my hands like I was a child again and begged me not to give up my future. "You gave him your youth," she whispered. "Don't give him the rest of your life, too." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her that I was not losing. I was waiting. But I saw fear in her eyes, and love, and desperation to protect me. So I hugged her and said nothing. At night, when I was alone, doubt would try to crawl in. What if they were right? What if I was making a mistake so large it couldn't be undone? There were moments when the weight of it all pressed against my chest, when I imagined myself years later with nothing, watching him live comfortably off the life we built together. But then I remembered his voice.
Cold.
Confident. Greedy. I won the house. The cars. Everything. He hadn't asked. He hadn't negotiated. He had claimed. That wasn't love. That wasn't fairness. That was entitlement. And entitlement makes people careless. The more news spread, the bolder he became. He started talking openly about his fresh start, about how easy the process was going to be, about how grateful he was that I was being reasonable. That word, reasonable, made my skin crawl. He'd smile at me during meetings, a smug little curve of his lips, like he was watching a predictable ending play out. Sometimes he'd lean back in his chair and glance at my hands, as if waiting to see them shake. They never did. One evening, after a particularly brutal phone call from a friend who accused me of letting women down everywhere, I sat alone in the dark and finally let myself cry. Not because I was weak, because I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of carrying the plan alone. Tired of being misunderstood. But even as the tears fell, my resolve didn't break. It hardened. I realized something then. Everyone was trying to save me from losing material things. No one understood that what I was protecting was far more valuable.
Control.
By the time the paperwork began moving forward, I had become exactly what he needed me to be. Quiet, compliant, predictable. And that was when I knew, without a doubt, that I had already won the most important part of this war. Because while everyone else was begging me to fight, he was already celebrating. And the louder his confidence grew, the closer he came to the moment that would destroy it. While everyone around me believed I was surrendering, I was preparing. Not loudly, not recklessly, but with the kind of patience that only comes from deep betrayal. The kind that doesn't rush because it knows time is a weapon. I stopped arguing with him altogether. That was the first move. No more defending myself. No more explaining. No more emotional reactions. I answered his messages politely, briefly, sometimes not at all. Every time I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction, his confidence grew. He mistook my silence for weakness. That mistake would cost him everything. At night, after the house went quiet, I would sit alone at the dining table with documents spread out in front of me. Bank statements, old contracts, emails I had once ignored, Papers I had signed years ago without realizing how important they would one day become. I read everything.
Slowly. Carefully.
Again and again. I discovered things he had forgotten. Clauses he never read. Accounts he assumed were shared but weren't. Investments he bragged about owning, even though my name had always been the one printed first. Funny how arrogance makes people sloppy. I remembered conversations from years ago, ones that had seemed insignificant at the time. Moments when he insisted I handle certain paperwork because he trusted me with numbers. Times when he told me to put assets under my name for convenience, for taxes, for speed. He had called it teamwork. I called it foresight. I didn't rush to my lawyer. I waited. I organized. I created copies of everything and stored them in places he would never think to look. I backed things up. I labeled nothing. Then, quietly, I made one phone call. Not to the lawyer everyone knew. Not to the one who argued loudly and threatened court battles. I needed someone else. Someone who understood strategy, not spectacle. When I sat across from her, she didn't interrupt me. She listened. Really listened. When I finished, she smiled, not kindly but knowingly. "He's going to hang himself," she said. That was the moment my fear began to fade. Together, we mapped everything out, not in terms of emotion but in terms of timing. What to reveal, what to hide, what to sign, what to let him believe was final. She explained something that stayed with me. "Court isn't about justice," she said. "It's about leverage." And I had more than he could imagine. Every day after that became a performance. I let him see me packing boxes, slowly, hesitantly, like someone being forced to dismantle her own life. I let him overhear phone calls where I sounded uncertain. I let him believe I was overwhelmed. Once, he caught me staring at the house like I was memorizing it for the last time.
He smirked.
"I know this is hard for you," he said, pretending to sound sympathetic. "But you'll be fine. You always land on your feet." What he meant was, "You'll survive without anything." I nodded, played the part. Inside, I was counting the days. He grew careless as the process moved forward. He bragged more. He stopped double-checking documents. He trusted his lawyer blindly and assumed mine was incompetent because I never challenged anything. During negotiations, he pushed harder every time I agreed too quickly. Asked for more. Took more. And I gave it to him. The house?
His.
The cars?
His.
The visible accounts? All his. Each concession inflated his ego and dulled his caution. He stopped asking questions. Stopped reading fine print. Stopped wondering why I wasn't fighting. That's when I knew the trap was complete. At night, the heartbreak would still visit me. There were moments when I would remember holidays in that house. Laughing in the kitchen. Nights we stayed up talking about the future. Dreams we built together. I mourned those memories quietly. But I didn't let them weaken me. I reminded myself of the way he looked at me when he demanded everything. Like I was disposable. Like love was a transaction he had already closed. That memory kept me sharp. As the final hearing approached, my lawyer asked me one last time if I was sure. "This is your last chance," he said. "Once you sign, there's no going back." I met his eyes.
"Come. Certain."
"Let him walk in thinking he's won," I said. "That's important." He nodded slowly. Even then, I don't think he fully understood. The night before court, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from anticipation. My body felt light, almost electric. Every piece was in place. Every move accounted for. I replayed the moment in my mind over and over. His smile. His confidence. The whisper. I imagined the exact second his world would tilt. Not when the judge spoke. Not when I signed. But when realization finally reached him. When he understood that greed had made him blind. That underestimating me had been the worst mistake of his life. I didn't want him ruined forever. I wanted him aware. Aware of what he lost. Aware of who he misjudged. Aware that he had done this to himself. When morning came, I dressed carefully. Nothing dramatic. Nothing defiant. Just calm, controlled, unremarkable. The most dangerous thing I could be. As I walked into that courtroom, I felt no anger, only clarity, because surrender was never my weakness. It was my disguise. And by the time he realized the truth, there would be no signatures left to undo it. The morning of the hearing arrived with the weight of inevitability. The house was quiet, the streets outside empty, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I dressed in neutral colors, nothing flashy, nothing to provoke attention, because all eyes were already on me in ways I could not yet imagine. Calmness was my armor. Patience was my weapon. And secrecy, my greatest ally. Walking into the courthouse, I could feel his eyes before I even saw him. He was leaning against the wall, a casual arrogance in his posture, smug and self-assured. That smile, the one I used to find charming, was now a signal of his fatal overconfidence. Every step I took toward him was deliberate. I wanted him to feel certain that he was about to win. That victory was already his. The courtroom was sterile, cold, and formal. The judge's eyes swept across us, and my stomach tightened for just a moment, not from fear, but from the thrill of anticipation. The tension in the room was palpable, like electricity before a storm. I sat quietly, letting him see my composed face, my calm demeanor, while inside, every heartbeat echoed a silent countdown. His lawyer was whispering details, pointing out the pile of documents, the properties, the accounts. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I nodded politely here and there, carefully hiding any hint of emotion. He took this as approval. He believed that I had been cowed, that his plan was complete. He thought the final signatures would be the end of it, the final proof that he had triumphed. The hearing began. The judge called the case and asked each party to present their statements. He stood first, confident, authoritative, outlining his claims, his demands, his reasoning. I listened. Every word was ammunition he thought would cement his victory. Every boast, every claim of superiority, every subtle insult he thought I would hear as a threat, all of it reinforced my plan. When my turn came, I spoke softly,
Calmly.
measured. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I didn't even raise my voice. I let him and the courtroom believe that I was relinquishing everything. I signed every sheet of paper, initialed every page, and handed the folders over with a small, almost imperceptible smile. He watched me like a predator watching prey, certain that the hunt was over, that the victory was his. He whispered something to his lawyer, a triumph in his tone. "She's broken," he said. "She's finally giving up. Everything is mine." I let him believe it. Then came the critical moment. The documents were handed to the judge for verification. He glanced over them and nodded. The judge's voice was firm, formal, and impartial, but every word seemed to hum in the space between us. I remained still, my fingers lightly touching the papers, my expression calm, almost serene. And then it happened. His lawyer leaned close, so close that only he could hear, and whispered 5 words that would destroy the smug confidence on my husband's face. At first, he didn't react. He blinked. His brow furrowed. Confusion clouded his once certain eyes. Then came the first tremor, a slight tightening of his jaw. Then the second, the slow widening of his eyes. Finally, realization.
Pure, terrifying, irreversible realiation.
It's all already in trust. The words hit him like a hammer. He stumbled back, his mind racing to understand, to fight, to undo what he thought was already his. But the law had been on my side all along. Every asset he thought he controlled, every account he believed he could touch, every property he assumed he owned, was legally untouchable. Placed in trust months ago, hidden meticulously, protected beyond the reach of his greed and arrogance. He looked around the courtroom, desperate for someone, anyone, to explain, to fix it, to tell him it wasn't true. But all he saw were blank faces, neutral expressions, witnesses who had watched the entire process unfold. His arrogance had blinded him. His greed had made him careless. And now, he was powerless. I signed the papers with quiet satisfaction, my calm demeanor masking the rush of triumph that surged through me. He was frozen in shock, staring at me as though the walls of the room had crumbled and revealed a truth he couldn't comprehend. For years, he had thought he knew me. He had thought he could manipulate, control, and dominate. And now, he realized he had been outplayed at every turn. Even his lawyer, the one he had trusted implicitly, could do nothing but whisper legalese that fell meaningless on deaf ears. The court was mine. My silence had been strategic. My patience had been deliberate. My heartbreak had been a shield, my composure a weapon. And then he shouted, not out of triumph, not even rational anger, but pure, uncontrollable panic. Words stumbled out of his mouth, accusations, demands, desperate pleas. But the truth had been set in stone. The assets were untouchable. Every bank account, every property, every valuable was secured beyond his reach. The judge looked at him coolly, reminding him that the court could only rule based on the law, not on his confusion or anger. And the irony was delicious. All this time, he had thought he could control everything. Now, he couldn't even control his own reactions. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I let the scene play out, allowing the full weight of his hubris and my careful planning to sink in. Every tremor of panic, every sputtered word, every furrowed brow was a confirmation of my foresight. Finally, he sank into his chair, defeated, not just by the law, but by his own misjudgment. He realized that victory is often an illusion, and arrogance can blind even the most confident of men. I, on the other hand, walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, calm as ever, knowing that the game had been mine all along. The whispers in the courthouse lingered long after I had left. People would talk about the audacity of my plan, the brilliance of my patience. But they didn't know the quiet hours, the careful calculations, the heartbreak that had fueled every decision. They didn't see the nights spent mapping every move, tracing every loophole, and ensuring that every asset, every piece of what I had built, would remain untouchable. As I stepped outside, the sunlight hitting my face felt like liberation. I didn't feel triumphant, not in the way people expect. I felt calm, powerful, whole. The heartbreak was still there, of course. It would never entirely fade, but now it was tempered by the knowledge that I had not only survived, but I had outsmarted him completely. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. The scream echoed longer than I expected, not because it was loud, but because it was empty, hollow. The sound of a man realizing that everything he believed was solid had just evaporated. I didn't turn around when it happened. I didn't need to. I could feel it in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm breaks. People think revenge is loud, explosive, public. They're wrong. The most devastating kind is quiet. As the courtroom emptied, not on his confusion or anger. And the irony was delicious. All this time, he had thought he could control everything. Now, he couldn't even control his own reactions. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I let the scene play out, allowing the full weight of his hubris and my careful planning to sink in. Every tremor of panic, every sputtered word, every furrowed brow was a confirmation of my foresight. Finally, he sank into his chair, defeated, not just by the law, but by his own misjudgment. He realized that victory is often an illusion, and arrogance can blind even the most confident of men. I, on the other hand, walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, calm as ever, knowing that the game had been mine all along. The whispers in the courthouse lingered long after I had left. People would talk about the audacity of my plan, the brilliance of my patience. But they didn't know the quiet hours, the careful calculations, the heartbreak that had fueled every decision. They didn't see the nights spent mapping every move, tracing every loophole, and ensuring that every asset, every piece of what I had built, would remain untouchable. As I stepped outside, the sunlight hitting my face felt like liberation. I didn't feel triumphant, not in the way people expect. I felt calm, powerful, whole. The heartbreak was still there, of course. It would never entirely fade, but now it was tempered by the knowledge that I had not only survived, but I had outsmarted him completely. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. The scream echoed longer than I expected. Not because it was loud, but because it was empty.
Hollow.
The sound of a man realizing that everything he believed was solid had just evaporated. I didn't turn around when it happened. I didn't need to. I could feel it in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm breaks. People think revenge is loud, explosive,
Public.
very wrong. The most devastating kind is quiet. As the courtroom emptied, his lawyer avoided my eyes. The same man who had strutted in with confidence now walked beside my husband with his shoulders tight, whispering frantic explanations. Legal terms, limitations, irreversibility, words that meant nothing to a man who had already lost control. He caught up to me in the hallway. "You planned this," he said, his voice shaking, not angry yet, just disoriented. "You planned this the whole time." I stopped walking and looked at him for the first time that day. Really looked. The man standing in front of me was not powerful. He was not victorious. He was small, stripped of certainty, stripped of the narrative he had built where he was always the smartest person in the room. "I didn't plan to be betrayed," I said calmly. "I adapted." His face twisted. "You lied."
No. Iraplia.
"I let you assume." That difference mattered more than he would ever understand. Over the next few days, the fallout began. At first, he tried denial. He told people there had been a misunderstanding, a clerical error, something his lawyer would fix. He laughed too loudly when he explained it, like someone trying to convince himself more than anyone else. But reality doesn't bend for ego. The accounts were frozen to him. The properties he bragged about owning were legally unreachable. The trust, my trust, was airtight. Every attempt he made to regain control was blocked by walls he hadn't known existed. Walls I had built quietly, patiently, while he was busy underestimating me. His calls started coming late at night. At first, they were angry, accusatory. He demanded explanations, apologies, reversals that didn't exist. Then they changed. The anger gave way to bargaining. "We can work something out. You don't need all of it. Be reasonable." Reasonable. The word returned like a bad joke. I didn't answer. That silence, the same one he once mistook for weakness, became unbearable to him. He had always needed a reaction, always needed to feel in control of the emotional temperature of the room. Now he had nothing. Word spread faster than I expected. Mutual friends started calling, carefully, cautiously, trying to sound neutral while clearly fishing for answers. Some apologized for doubting me. Others were simply curious. A few were shocked, not by what I had done, but by who I had turned out to be. "I never thought you had that in you," one of them said.
Neither did he.
And that was the point. His reputation began to unravel. Not dramatically, but subtly. The kind of unraveling that can't be blamed on bad luck. Deals fell through. People hesitated. Whispers followed him into rooms he used to dominate. Confidence is contagious. So is doubt. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. Not loudly. Not with announcements or celebrations. I moved into a smaller place by choice, not necessity. I furnished it slowly.
Carefully.
Every object placed because I wanted it there, not because it symbolized a life someone else had chosen for me. For the first time in years, my home felt like mine. There were still nights when the grief returned. Quiet moments when I mourned the version of myself who had believed love was enough. When I wondered how someone I trusted so completely could have reduced our life together to assets on a list. But the grief no longer controlled me.
It reminded me
why I had been patient, why I had stayed silent, why I had let him believe he was winning. One afternoon, weeks later, I ran into him by accident. He looked older, not just tired, but diminished. His confidence, once effortless, now felt forced. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Anger, regret,
fear.
"I never thought you'd do this," he said. I smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just honestly. "I never thought you'd give me a reason." That was when I realized the revenge had already completed itself. Not because he lost money, but because he lost the story where he was superior, where I was predictable, where he was untouchable. He had built his identity on being the one who always came out ahead. And I had taken that from him. The irony was almost poetic. I didn't walk away feeling triumphant in the way movies portray it. There was no victory dance. No dramatic monologue. There was something better.
Peace.
The kind that comes from knowing you trusted yourself when no one else did. That you didn't let heartbreak turn you reckless or small. That you chose intelligence over impulse. People still ask me if I regret not fighting harder. I tell them the truth. I didn't fight in the way they expected. I fought in the only way that guaranteed I would win. Because sometimes the smartest move isn't taking everything by force. It's letting someone believe they've taken it from you until they realize they never touched it at all. Weeks have passed since the courtroom. The echo of that 5-word whisper still lingers in my mind, not as a memory of triumph alone, but as a testament to patience, planning, and self-preservation. Every time I think of him, I don't feel hatred anymore. I feel clarity. I feel understanding. I feel the quiet satisfaction of someone who turned heartbreak into power. It's strange, the things you notice after the storm has passed. I notice the way sunlight spills across the floor of my apartment, golden and warm, without asking permission. I notice the hum of the city outside, distant yet present, like life itself moving forward while others are stuck in their illusions. I notice my own heartbeat, not anxious, not fearful, but calm, steady,
Whole.
I look back at the years I spent with him. I remember the laughter, the tenderness, the promises. I remember the love that once felt endless, unbreakable. And I mourn it, not because it failed me, but because it was real. It was mine. It mattered. And yet, that same love made me vulnerable. That same trust almost made me powerless. But vulnerability does not always mean defeat. Sometimes it means preparation. Sometimes it means learning. And sometimes it means waiting for the exact moment when the world will reveal the justice you have quietly set in motion. I think about the day of the hearing, the way he smiled, confident that victory was his. I remember the subtle twitch in his jaw when he heard those words. I remember the shock in his eyes, the disbelief, the futile grasping at control he never truly had. I remember how the courtroom, once a place of tension and fear, became a stage where patience and foresight finally took center. I learned something crucial that day. People overestimate themselves constantly. They assume they know every move you will make. They assume you will break, you will panic, you will fight visibly and loudly. But the most devastating moves are often invisible. The most precise strategies are executed in silence, in thought, in the quiet moments no one sees. And the most complete victories are not marked by public acknowledgement. They are marked by the private understanding that you have survived, thrived, and outsmarted someone who thought they had you figured out. Life after the courtroom has been calm, almost surreal. I live in a space that I chose, furnished not to impress anyone but to reflect the life I want. I wake up every morning with a sense of control that I hadn't felt in years. There is no fear of losing what is rightfully mine, no anxiety about someone else dictating the terms of my existence. I walk freely, I breathe freely, I exist without compromise. And that freedom, my freedom, is the sweetest revenge of all. I see him sometimes. Not often and never by choice. But in the quiet corners of memory or through mutual acquaintances, I catch glimpses of what remains of the man who once demanded everything. He looks smaller, not in stature, but in presence. Confidence has been replaced by caution, smugness by regret. Every step he takes is careful, calculated, and constrained by the realization that arrogance has consequences. And that knowledge, subtle as it may be, is a constant echo of the power I quietly reclaimed. I still remember the calls, the frantic attempts to negotiate, to bargain, to reverse what could not be reversed. They were desperate and absurd, but they revealed something important. He had counted on me to react in fear or anger, to make mistakes, to falter. And I did none of those things. I simply existed, waited, and watched as every assumption he made unraveled before him. Even friends and family noticed the transformation. Those who once doubted me now look at me with something between awe and curiosity. They ask, gently, how I maintained such composure, how I managed to turn what seemed like a devastating loss into a personal victory. And I tell them the truth, not in detail, but in principle, patience, strategy, understanding the value of silence, recognizing that sometimes the most powerful move is to let the world think it has won, and then quietly show them that it never had. There is still heartbreak, of course. Heartbreak never fully disappears. It lingers in quiet moments, a soft ache beneath the surface. I mourn the life I thought I had, the trust one gave, the love I invested. But that grief is tempered now. It is measured. It does not consume me. Instead, it fuels the clarity that guides every decision I make, every boundary I set, every choice to prioritize myself above anyone else's expectations or assumptions. I often think about the lessons I have learned, about how betrayal can reveal strength, how deception can teach discernment, and how patience can outmaneuver force. I think about how people rarely see the full scope of someone else's resilience, because resilience often wears the guise of compliance, humility, or even despair. I think about how letting someone believe they are victorious can be the ultimate form of power, and how justice, quiet, precise, absolute justice, is more satisfying than any immediate act of revenge. And then, when the memory of him comes to mind, I feel nothing but calm.
Norai. No bitterness.
Just clarity. He is a chapter in my life, a teacher disguised as a betrayer, a man who underestimated me and paid the price in ways both visible and invisible. I do not rejoice in his downfall. I simply recognize it. I simply accept it. I simply move forward, fully intact, fully alive, and fully aware of my own strength. In the end, I realized that the greatest revenge was never about taking anything from him. It was about taking back myself, my dignity, my peace, my freedom. And in doing so, I created a life that cannot be touched by arrogance, by greed, or by the false sense of superiority someone else may have once believed they held over me. So now I live deliberately. Every decision is mine. Every step is calculated, not out of fear, but out of understanding. I do not chase approval, nor do I require validation. I do not let past pain dictate my present. And in that space, quiet, calm, deliberate, I find my true victory. Because sometimes, winning isn't about confrontation. It isn't about proving someone wrong or making them suffer. Sometimes, winning is about surviving gracefully, outsmarting quietly, and living fully. Sometimes, winning is about showing, without a word, that the world does not belong to arrogance or greed, but to the person who knows patience, strategy, and self-worth. And as I look out over my own life now, I smile softly. Not because I have everything he thought I might lose. Not because he suffered. But because I am here.
Whole. Strong. Free.
And that, more than any material possession, was the victory I had been building all along. He thought he had taken it all from me. But he didn't even see that I had already won.